My guest, James Fallows, has written about these questions. He's in Beijing. He's been reporting from China for The Atlantic since 2006. In the current edition of the magazine, he has an interview with the head of the China Investment Corporation, who oversees many of China's American holdings. Fallows also has a new collection of his articles about China called Postcards from Tomorrow Square. So, what was it like for you to watch the election from China?
What was most different about being in China from being other parts of the world and perhaps from being in the U.S. is there was less emotional content to the election here, I think, than other places. This is a widely observed phenomenon in China, and I think I can explain it this way. One is there is a preference, there's been a preference for China for the familiar, known quantity in the U.S. of making no ripples. If it would have been possible to have George Bush in office for another 4 years, he would have won by a big landslide in China. Partly that's because he's been relatively good for China, partly because they always want more of the same. If it couldn't be George Bush, they would want to have Hillary Clinton, because she also was somebody they'd been familiar with in the past, despite some of her own disputes with China. And there were two other factors which I think affected the Chinese view. One is they view Democrats as being, on the whole, trouble for China on trade issues. So they thought, regardless of anything Obama said, there might be trade problems. And a delicate point, but a true one, the fact that Obama will be the first non-white president of the U.S., which was a symbolic plus in so much of the world, I think was a symbolic minus here. That attitudes, racial attitudes towards within China are what Americans would view as anachronistic. It is still quite natural for educated people to say that they view whites as talented and blacks as untalented, blacks as having bad work habits, blacks as not being educated. And so the idea that a black person could be the head of this powerful nation took more adjustment within China than in other countries.
My guest is James Fallows, and he's national correspondent for The Atlantic, but since 2006 he's actually been reporting from China for The Atlantic, and his new book, which collects many of his articles from China, is called Postcards from Tomorrow Square. He's speaking to us from Beijing.